The Zethkorian Empire had ruled the stars for 11,000 years, and in all that time, no species had ever dared to laugh at them. High Emissary Verthax stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, watching the small blue planet spin slowly in the darkness of space. He had conquered 47 worlds in his long career, and he expected this one to be no different from the others. Status report, he commanded, his deep voice echoing through the massive chamber. The primitive species calls their world Earth, his science officer replied. They've only recently discovered nuclear technology and have not yet left their own star system. They should pose no threat to the Empire. Verthax allowed himself a small smile, which on his elongated face looked more like a sock being stretched. His species had evolved on a high-gravity world, giving them tall, thin bodies with long necks and simple facial features. Their mouths were horizontal slits, and their 4 eyes sat in a row across their foreheads. Assemble the subjugation fleet, Verthax ordered. We shall teach these humans the meaning of fear within 3 days. 300 Zethkorian dreadnoughts hung in orbit around Earth. Each ship was 5 kilometers long, covered in spikes and dark armor designed to strike terror into any who saw them. 2 million soldiers waited in their transport vessels, ready to descend upon the planet below. The humans had detected them, of course. Their primitive satellites and telescopes had spotted the fleet almost immediately. Radio signals flooded from the planet, filled with confused chatter and what the translators identified as panic. Excellent, Verthax said, adjusting his cloak of dominion. The ceremonial garment was a deep purple fabric covered in ancient symbols, with large decorative eyes sewn along its edges. It had been worn by conquerors for thousands of years, and it represented the absolute authority of the Empire. Open a channel to their leaders, he commanded. I shall deliver the ultimatum personally. The communication systems hummed to life, and soon Verthax found himself looking at a vast chamber filled with human delegates. They called it the United Nations, a gathering place for representatives from all their little nations. How quaint, he thought, that they still divided themselves into such small groups. He rose to his full height of 12 feet and spread his arms wide, letting the cloak of dominion flow around him. His elite guards stood behind him in their obsidian battle armor, their weapons gleaming under the ship's lights. People of Earth, Verthax began, his voice booming through the translation systems. I am High Emissary Verthax of the Zethkorian Empire, and I bring you tidings of your future. He paused for dramatic effect. As was traditional for 11,000 years, the Empire has brought order to the chaos of the galaxy. We have lifted primitive species from their ignorance and given them purpose. Now, your world has been chosen to receive this great gift. The human delegates sat in silence, watching him with expressions he could not quite read. Good, he thought. They were already afraid. You have 2 choices, Verthax continued, his voice dropping to a threatening growl. You may surrender peacefully and accept your place within the Empire, serving the greater glory of the Zethkorian people. Or you may resist, and we shall crush your civilization beneath our boots. He let those words hang in the air. This was the moment when most species began to weep and beg. Some had even collapsed from the sheer terror of facing the Empire's might. But the humans did something unexpected. A man in the front row, wearing a small flag pin on his suit, made a strange sound. It was a quick exhale through his nose, almost like a snort. Verthax noticed but continued his speech. The Empire is eternal, he declared, raising his voice to its most intimidating tone. Resistance is bork, bork, bork. Someone shouted from the back of the chamber. Verthax froze. He did not understand the words, but he understood that he had been interrupted. That had never happened before. Then the laughter began. It started with the woman in the Brazilian delegation. She tried to hold it in, pressing her hand against her mouth, but the sound escaped anyway. It spread to the man next to her, then to the entire row, then to the entire chamber within seconds. Every human in the room was laughing. They laughed so hard that tears streamed down their faces. Some of them doubled over in their seats. One man fell out of his chair entirely and lay on the floor, shaking with uncontrollable mirth. Even the security guards along the walls were struggling to maintain their composure. Verthax stood completely still, his four eyes blinking in rapid confusion. His guards shifted nervously behind him, unsure of what was happening. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, but his words only seemed to make the laughter louder. "I'm sorry," a woman gasped, trying to catch her breath. "I'm so sorry. But you look exactly like—" She could not finish the sentence before another wave of laughter overtook her. Verthax felt something he had never experienced in his 300 years of life: embarrassment. His purple skin flushed darker, and he pulled his cloak of dominion tighter around himself. "You dare to mock the Empire?" he roared, but his voice cracked slightly, and that only made the humans laugh harder. "Cut the transmission," he ordered his communications officer. "Cut it now." The screen went dark, but Verthax could still hear the laughter echoing in his mind. He stood on the bridge of the most powerful warship in the fleet, surrounded by soldiers who had never known defeat. And he had absolutely no idea what had just happened. "High Emissary," his science officer said carefully, "what are your orders?" Verthax did not answer immediately. He was still trying to process the impossible scene he had just witnessed. No species had ever laughed at the Zeth-Korian Empire. They had screamed, begged, pleaded, and surrendered, but never laughed. "Return to the fleet," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We must analyze this situation before proceeding," as the shuttle carried him back to the Eternal Dominion. Verthax stared out the window at the blue planet below. Somewhere down there, billions of humans were probably still laughing at him. He did not understand it. But he knew one thing for certain: something had gone terribly wrong. And he needed to find out what before the news reached the Emperor. The conquest of Earth was not going according to plan. High Emissary Verthax paced back and forth across the war room of the Eternal Dominion, his long legs carrying him from one end to the other in just a few strides. His advisors sat around the circular table, none of them willing to speak first. "Explain it to me," Verthax demanded for the 50th time. "Why did they laugh?" Senior cultural analyst Kethra cleared her throat nervously. She had spent the last 48 hours studying human communications, and she was not sure how to deliver her findings. "High Emissary," she began, "I believe I have discovered the source of the problem. But I must warn you that the explanation is somewhat difficult to accept." "Speak," Verthax commanded. Stopping his pacing to face her directly, Kethra activated the holographic display in the center of the table. An image appeared, showing a simple fabric tube with eyes sewn onto it. A human hand was inserted into the bottom, making the tube move and talk. "This is what humans call a sock puppet," Kethra explained. "It is a form of entertainment, primarily used to amuse their children. The design involves a long tube shape with a simple mouth and prominent eyes." Verthax stared at the image, then down at his own body. His stomach dropped. "You cannot be serious," he said quietly. "Unfortunately, I am completely serious," Kethra replied, bringing up more images. There were hundreds of sock puppets in all colors and sizes, and every single one of them bore an uncomfortable resemblance to the Zeth-Korian form. When the humans saw us, they did not see conquerors. They saw children's toys. A heavy silence fell over the war room. Verthax felt his face flush with humiliation once again. "It gets worse," Kethra continued reluctantly. "Our ancient ceremonial language, when translated through their audio systems, sounds remarkably similar to something they call the Swedish chef." She played a recording. A strange creature with wild hair and a large nose was speaking in a gibberish language, making sounds like bork, bork, while throwing food around the kitchen. The other advisors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. When you delivered your ultimatum, Kethra explained, the phonetic patterns of our sacred tongue matched almost perfectly with this comedic character. The humans could not take your words seriously because to them, you sounded like a joke. Verthax gripped the edge of the table so hard that his knuckles turned pale. 11,000 years of imperial dignity had been destroyed in a matter of minutes. And the Cloak of Dominion? He asked, dreading the answerk. Lur winced. The decorative eyes sewn along the edges are called googly eyes in human culture. They are used to make inanimate objects appear silly and amusing. The combination of your appearance, your voice, and your ceremonial garments created what humans call a perfect storm of comedy. Or General Vexner slammed his fist on the table. This is outrageous. He shouted, we should simply destroy their cities and be done with it. Let them laugh at smoking craters. I would advise against that, Kethra said, pulling up new data on the display. I have been monitoring their global communications network, and the situation has become significantly more complicated. The holographic display changed to show hundreds of different images and videos. Vadak saw himself repeated over and over, his ultimatum speech cut and edited into countless variations. In one video, his words had been set to music. In another, cartoon effects had been added to make his eyes blink at different times. The humans have something called social media, Kethra explained. It allows them to share information and entertainment across their entire planet almost instantly. Within 6 hours of your transmission, images of our fleet had been viewed over 2 billion times. She showed them more content. There were drawings of Zethkorian warriors wearing silly hats. There were jokes comparing them to various human foods and animals. There was even a competition to see who could make the most accurate sock puppet version of Varthax. This one has received particular attention, Kethra said. Playing a video, a human had taken Varthax's ultimatum speech and modified the audio. The words had been rearranged and repeated to create a rhythmic pattern, and music had been added underneath. The result was strangely catchy. And even Verthax found his foot tapping along before he caught himself. They call it a remix, Kethra explained. This version has been played over 50 million times, and the number is still growing. Our sacred declaration of conquest has become what humans call a dance track. General Vexner looked like he was about to explode with rage. This is an insult that cannot be tolerated. He roared, we must show them the true power of the Empire. The general may be correct, another advisor spoke up. Our intimidation tactics have failed, but our weapons have not. Perhaps a demonstration of force will remind them of the danger they face. Verthax considered this. It was true that the Zethkorian Empire had not conquered the galaxy through threats alone. When words failed, they had always relied on overwhelming firepower. What do you suggest? He asked. General Vexner stood, his armor creaking as he moved. Their moon, he said, pointing to the display. We destroy their moon. Let them laugh at that. The other advisors murmured in agreement. The destruction of a celestial body was a classic tactic, one that had broken the will of 17 previous civilizations. No species could watch their own moon shatter and still believe they could resist. The Annihilator beam will need 6 hours to charge to full power, General Vexner continued. But once it fires, their moon will be reduced to dust. They will see the true might of the Empire, and their laughter will turn to screams. Verthax nodded slowly. This was what he understood. This was what the Empire did best. Very well, he said. Prepare the Annihilator beam. We shall show these humans what happens to those who mock the Zethkorian Empire. As the war room emptied, Kethra remained behind. She had more data to analyze, and something about the humans worried her. They did not react the way other species reacted. Their laughter was not nervous or fearful. It was genuine amusement. She pulled up more files on human history and began to read. What she found over the next 6 hours would change everything she thought she knew about this strange species. But for now, the Empire was committed to its path. The annihilator beam would fire, the moon would be destroyed, and the humans would finally learn to fear their new masters. At least, that was the plan. The annihilator beam was the pride of the Zethkorian fleet, a weapon of such terrible power that most species surrendered at the mere mention of its name. It had destroyed moons, shattered asteroids, and once even cracked the crust of a small planet. No force in the known galaxy could withstand its fury-high emissary Verthax, watched from the observation deck as the weapon charged. Massive energy coils along the spine of the Eternal Dominion glowed brighter and brighter, casting an eerie purple light across the surrounding ships. The entire fleet had moved into position, forming a ceremonial ring around the flagship. How are the humans responding? Verthax asked, not taking his eyes off the charging weapon. They are watching. High Emissary, his communications officer reported. Every satellite and telescope on the planet is pointed at us. They have also begun broadcasting our fleet on their global networks. Good, Verthax said with satisfaction. Let them see what is coming. Let them understand the consequences of their disrespect. Down on Earth, the humans were indeed watching. Billions of people had stopped their daily activities to witness the alien demonstration. News channels provided continuous coverage, with expert commentators speculating about what was about to happen. But the tone of the coverage was not what Verthax had expected. As you can see, the alien weapon appears to be charging up for some kind of massive energy release, a news anchor reported. Her voice calm and almost amused. Scientists estimate the beam will fire in approximately 4 hours. In the meantime, several betting websites have opened pools on the exact time of firing. And one pizza company is offering free delivery to anyone who correctly guesses the color of the beam in living rooms and offices around the world. People gathered to watch the show. They brought snacks and drinks. They invited friends over. Some even organized viewing parties with themed decorations. A university professor in Germany had calculated the likely energy output of the weapon based on the glow patterns and posted his findings on social media. Impressive, but not exceptional, he had written, adding a shrugging emoji at the end. His post had been shared over 100,000 times. Meanwhile, on the Eternal Dominion, the countdown continued. General Lexner stood beside Verthax, his 4 eyes gleaming with anticipation. The humans will finally learn to fear us, the general said. Once they see their moon reduced to rubble, there will be no more laughter. Agreed, Verthax replied, though a small part of him still felt uneasy. These humans were not reacting normally. Even now, facing the destruction of their moon, they seemed more curious than afraid. The weapon is at 90% charge, the weapons officer announced. We will be ready to fire in 30 minutes. Verthax nodded and opened a communication channel to the planet below. People of Earth, he declared, you have chosen to mock the Zethkorian Empire. Now you shall witness the consequences of your foolishness. Watch as we destroy your moon and know that the same fate awaits your cities if you continue to resist. He closed the channel and waited. Surely now the humans would understand the danger they faced on Earth. The response was immediate. Social media exploded with activity, but not the kind Verthax had hoped for. Did the sock puppet just threaten to destroy our moon? One popular post read, "This is the best Tuesday ever." Another post simply said, "Called in sick to work to watch aliens blow up the moon. No regrets." A famous scientist went on television to explain that the moon was actually quite large and very dense, and that destroying it would require an enormous amount of energy. His explanation was largely ignored in favor of a viral video. showing cats watching the alien fleet on TV screens. "The weapon is fully charged," the weapons officer announced, his voice trembling with excitement. "Ready to fire on your command." "High Emissary." Verthax straightened his posture and raised his hand. This was the moment of triumph. This was when the humans would finally understand their place in the universe. "Fire," he commanded. The annihilator beam erupted from the Eternal Dominion with the force of a dying star. Brilliant purple energy streaked across the void, lighting up the darkness of space. The beam struck the moon dead center, exactly as Planet Vorthax waited for the explosion. He waited for the moon to crack and shatter. He waited for the debris field that would remind humanity of their vulnerability for generations to come. He kept waiting. The moon was still there. A small scorch mark appeared on its surface, but otherwise the gray sphere remained completely intact. It hung in the sky as it always had, seemingly unimpressed by the attack. "What happened?" Verthax demanded, his voice rising with panic. "Why is it still there?" The weapons officer frantically checked his instruments. "I do not understand," he stammered. The beam functioned perfectly. All energy was delivered to the target. General Dexner pushed past the officer to examine the readings himself. His face went pale as he realized the problem. "The composition?" he said slowly. "We assumed it would be like other moons we have destroyed. Calcium deposits and frozen gases. But this moon is different." "Different how?" Verthax demanded. "It is solid rock and iron," the general replied, his voice hollow. "Merely 4 billion years of accumulated material compressed into an incredibly dense mass." Our beam barely scratched the surface. Down on Earth, the humans had noticed a scorch mark. Within minutes, they had given it a name. "Looks like the aliens left us a souvenir," one news anchor reported with a grin. "Social media has already named the scorch mark Gerald. There is currently a petition to make it a protected landmark." The joke spread faster than the news of the attack itself. Someone created a cartoon showing a Zeth-Korian ship trying to blow up the moon with a party horn. Another person photoshopped the scorch mark to look like a smiley face. But the worst news for Vorthax was yet to come. "High Emissary," his engineering officer reported nervously. "The annihilator beam has drained our primary power reserves. 15 of our dreadnoughts have gone completely dark. They will need at least 72 hours to recharge their cores." Verthax felt the blood drain from his face. 1/6 of his fleet was now powerless, floating helplessly in orbit around a planet full of people who were laughing at Thema. Transmission came through from Earth. It was an official communication from one of their governments. "Dear Zeth-Korian Empire," the message read, "we noticed some of your ships seem to be having power problems. We would be happy to send up some jumper cables and a few car batteries if that would help. Please let us know if you need any other assistance. Sincerely, Earth." General Dexner crushed the datapad in his hand. "They are mocking us," he growled. "Even after witnessing our weapon, they are still mocking us." Verthax did not respond. He simply stared out the window at the moon and its new scorch mark. Somewhere down on Earth, billions of humans were probably celebrating what they saw as a victory for the first time in his long career. Verthax had no idea what to do next. 3 weeks had passed since the failed moon attack, and the Zeth-Korian Empire had finally agreed to diplomatic talks. High Emissary Verthax had resisted at first, but the Emperor himself had sent orders to find a peaceful resolution. Apparently, the videos of their humiliation had somehow reached other parts of the galaxy, and the Empire's reputation was suffering. The negotiations took place on a space station that the humans had hastily assembled in orbit. It was crude by Zeth-Korian standards, held together with bolts and welding seams, but it functioned well enough. Verthax found himself sitting across a table from a group of human diplomats, trying very hard not to look like a sock puppet. "Let us begin with an exchange of information." the lead human diplomat suggested. She was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes, and she did not seem intimidated by Verthax at all. "We would like to learn more about your empire, and in return, we will share information about Earth and its people." Verthax agreed, though he saw little point in learning about these primitive creatures. Still, it would give his cultural analyst something to do while he figured out how to salvage this disaster over the next several days. Information flowed in both directions. The Zethkorians learned about human history, culture, science, and society. The humans learned about the Empire's conquests, technology, and political structure at first. Verthax paid little attention to the data his team collected. He was too busy trying to maintain his dignity during the diplomatic sessions, where the humans kept making references he did not understand and then poorly hiding their smiles. But then senior cultural analyst Kethra requested an urgent meeting. "High Emissary," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I have completed my analysis of human history and biology. I believe you need to see this immediately." She activated her holographic display, and Verthax found himself looking at images of human warfare. There were primitive weapons first, spears and swords and arrows. But the technology quickly advanced to guns, tanks, and aircraft. Humans have been fighting each other since the beginning of their recorded history, Kethra explained. They have developed increasingly sophisticated methods of killing their own kind. This weapon here is called a nuclear bomb. It can destroy an entire city in a single explosion. They use such weapons against each other? Verthax asked, confused. They have used them twice in actual warfare, Kethra confirmed, and they have built thousands more since then. At the peak of what they call the Cold War, humans had enough nuclear weapons to destroy all life on their planet several times over. Verthax leaned forward, suddenly very interested. Why would any species create weapons capable of destroying themselves? That is exactly the question that troubles me, Kethra replied. The Zethkorian Empire conquers through intimidation. We frighten our enemies into submission. But humans cannot be intimidated because they have already faced the possibility of total extinction at their own hands. They have looked into the void and shrugged. She brought up more data. Images of humans climbing mountains, jumping from aircraft, diving into deep water, and engaging in countless other dangerous activities. They call these extreme sports, Kethra explained. Thousands of humans die every year doing these things. And yet millions more continue to participate. They actively seek out danger for entertainment. That is insanity. General Vexner muttered from his seat nearby. Perhaps, Kethra agreed. But there is more. She showed them images of a continent called Australia. It was filled with creatures that seemed designed specifically to kill. Venomous snakes, poisonous spiders, aggressive birds, and predatory sea creatures surrounded the human settlements there. Humans live here, Kethra said. Not because they have to, but because they want to. They have made homes among some of the most dangerous creatures on their planet. She showed them a small animal with black and white fur. This is called a honey badger, she explained. It weighs approximately 10 kilograms, but it will attack lions, cobras, and any other creature that threatens it. Humans admire this animal because they recognize something of themselves in it. Verthax stared at the screen, a cold feeling spreading through his chest. The pattern is consistent throughout their history, Kethra continued. When faced with superior enemies, humans do not surrender. They adapt, resist, and often ultimately prevail. They have a concept called spite, which means continuing to fight not because you can win, but because you refuse to give the enemy the satisfaction of your defeat. General Vexner made a strange choking sound. This is not possible, he said weakly. No species behaves this way. There is one more thing, Kethra said, her voice dropping to nearly a whisper. I analyzed their entertainment media to understand their cultural values. I watched what they call horror films. She paused, seeming to gather her courage. High Emissary, their horror films are about creatures far more terrifying than us. Beings that cannot be killed, that hunt without mercy, that represent their deepest fears. And humans watch these films for fun. They pay money to be frightened. They seek out fear as a form of entertainment. Verthax sat in silence, his 4 eyes blinking slowly as he processed this information. Everything he thought he knew about this conquest was wrong. We came here as predators, he finally said. But we are not the predators in this situation, are we? Kethra shook her head. No, High Emissary. Based on my analysis, we are prey that announced itself. We came to their world with our fleet and our weapons and our threats, and they did not see conquerors. They saw an opportunity. An opportunity for what? General Vexner demanded. I am not entirely sure, Kethra admitted, but I recommend we proceed with extreme caution. These humans are not what they appear to be. Their laughter is not a sign of foolishness. It is a sign that they are not afraid of us. She brought up one final image. It was a human expression, a smile that showed teeth. In most species, showing teeth is a sign of aggression, she explained. Humans show their teeth when they are happy. But some researchers believe this behavior evolved from an ancient threat display. When humans smile at you, they are showing you their weapons. Verthax thought about all the smiling humans he had seen during the negotiations. Suddenly, those friendly expressions seemed much more sinister. What do you recommend? He asked Kethra. I recommend we stop trying to conquer Earth, she replied, and instead find out if they would be willing to be our allies. Verthax nodded slowly. It was not the outcome he had planned, but after everything he had learned, it seemed like the wisest choice. The Empire had spent 11,000 years being the biggest threat in every room. It was time to consider what happened when something bigger walked through the door. The Treaty of Buenos Aires was signed 6 months after first contact, and it changed everything the galaxy thought it knew about the Zethkorian. Empire High Emissary Verthax stood beside the human Secretary General as cameras flashed and crowds cheered. He had expected to stand on this planet as a conqueror, but instead, he was signing a treaty of alliance and mutual protection. History, it seemed, had a sense of humor. The terms of the treaty were simple. The Zethkorian Empire would share its technology, star maps, and trade networks with Earth. In exchange, humanity would provide something the Empire desperately needed, but had never been able to find: protection. You must understand something, Verthax had explained during the final negotiations. The Empire did not grow strong only through conquest. We also grew strong through survival. There are things in this galaxy far worse than us. The human diplomats had listened carefully as Verthax described the horrors that lurked in the darkness between stars. There were ancient machine intelligences that had been hunting organic life since before the Zethkorians first looked up at the sky. There were hive mind parasites that could consume entire worlds in a matter of weeks. There were void-dwelling entities that fed on the energy of stars themselves. We have been running for 11,000 years, Verthax admitted. Every conquest, every expansion, has been an attempt to stay ahead of these threats. We build our fleets and train our soldiers, but deep down, we know that we are simply delaying the inevitable. The humans had exchanged glances across the table, but not the fearful glances Verthax expected. These were the glances of people who had just been told about a new challenge, a new frontier, a new problem to solve. Show us, the Secretary General had said simply, and so Verthax had shown them. He showed them recordings of machine fleets stripping worlds bare, leaving nothing but dead rock behind. He showed them images of parasitic infestations spreading across continents. He showed them sensor data of entities so vast that they made stars look small. When he finished, the room was silent. Verthax waited for the fear to set in. for the humans to realize just how small and fragile they truly were. Instead, a young military officer in the back of the room raised her hand. "So these void entities," she asked, "has anyone ever tried fighting one directly?" Verthax blinked. "Fighting one would be suicide," he replied. "Even our most powerful weapons cannot harm them." The officer nodded thoughtfully. "But has anyone actually tried?" She pressed. "Like, really committed to it?" "What would be the point?" Verthax asked. Genuinely confused, the officer smiled. And Verthax remembered what Kethra had said about human smiles showing teeth. "Sometimes you fight because you might win," the officer said. "And sometimes you fight because the alternative is unacceptable." That conversation had taken place 6 months ago. Now, standing at the treaty signing ceremony, Verthax was watching the beginning of something unprecedented. Human scientists had already begun studying Zethkorian technology, not just to copy it, but to improve it. Within weeks, they had identified inefficiencies in engine designs that had been unchanged for 3,000 years. Within months, they had proposed weapon systems that made the Annihilator beam look like a flashlight, but the technology was not what impressed Verthax the most. It was the attitude human volunteers had lined up by the millions to join the new combined defense force. They came from every nation, every background, every walk of life. They trained harder than any soldiers Verthax had ever seen, pushing themselves to the breaking point, and then pushing further. Why do they do this? Verthax asked Kethra one day, watching a group of human recruits running through obstacle courses in the rain. They could stay safe on their planet. They do not need to face these dangers. Kethra had spent the last 6 months living among humans, studying their ways. She had an answer ready. They do it because the dangers exist, she explained. Humans cannot ignore a threat. It is not in their nature. Once they learned about the horrors waiting in the galaxy, they had only 2 choices: hide and hope, or stand and fight. For humans, there is really only one option. Within a year, human vessels were patrolling the borders of Zethkorian space. They were smaller than the Empire's dreadnoughts, but faster and more agile. Their crews had a reputation for taking impossible risks and somehow surviving within 5 years. The first void entity was encountered by a human fleet. All standard protocols called for immediate retreat, for drawing the entity away from populated systems and hoping it would lose interest. Instead, the human commander ordered an Attic Vorthax watch the battle recordings in disbelief. The human ships swarmed around the vast entity, probing for weaknesses, testing different weapons, adapting their tactics in real time. They lost ships, they lost lives, but they did not retreat in the end. They did not destroy the entity. That proved impossible. But they did wound it, something no other force in galactic history had ever accomplished. The entity withdrew, and it did not return to that region of space for decades, the human commander. When asked about the battle, had quoted something called Monty Python. Verthax did not understand the reference, but the other humans in the room had laughed. That was the strange thing about humans, Verthax realized. They laughed at everything. They laughed when they were happy. They laughed when they were scared. They laughed in the face of certain death. It was their way of saying that nothing, no matter how terrible, would break their spirit. 10 years after first contact, Verthax officially retired from his position as High Emissary. The Emperor appointed him as permanent ambassador to Earth, a post he accepted gladly. He had grown fond of the strange little planet and its even stranger inhabitants. On his last night before leaving the homeworld, Verthax stood on a balcony overlooking the capital city. Kethra stood beside him, as she often did these days. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Coming to Earth, I mean. We went there as conquerors, and instead we found protectors." Verthax considered the question carefully. He thought about the Empire's long history of fear and flight. He thought about the human soldiers who now stood guard over Zeth-Korian children. He thought about the future, which for the first time in 11,000 years seemed less like a countdown to extinction and more like an open door. No, he finally said, I do not regret it. I think we finally found what we were looking for all along. We just did not know we were looking for it. Ketzra nodded. And what was that? Verdak smiled, an expression he had learned from the humans. It felt strange on his face, but also right somehow. Hope, he said. We found hope, somewhere across the galaxy. Human soldiers were laughing in the face of darkness. And for the first time in millennia, the Zeth-Korian Empire laughed with them.